Dear audience, welcome to the NT podcast. Today we have a very special guest, the executive director and editor of Spectrum magazine, Mr. Alexander Carpenter. Mr. Carpenter, welcome.
Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you for your really thoughtful work in Adventism, and I'm looking forward to talking with you and the audience today.
Thank you so much. So on this channel we call many great scholars and scientists, theologians. So we need your voice to hear something about spectrum. So can you tell us something about that? Because we are interested in your mission and the vision of your work. So please.
Yeah, so Spectrum started in the 1960s, which, as you know, was a time of rethinking a lot of things in our world, no matter where you were. And in Adventism, it was started by a lot of young Adventists who were going to graduate schools and thinking critically and asking questions about the faith that they had grown up with. And they actually wanted to discuss, which is what we continue to promote. In fact, our mission statement is very simple today. We've had it for almost 20 years, and that is we create community through conversation. So back in the 60s, they would meet on Sabbath afternoons near where they were going to graduate school out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, going to Harvard and the other great schools in that area, and then in California at Berkeley, where you had people at UC Berkeley and the Graduate Theological Union, also rethinking and discussing. And out of that, they decided to create a journal, and I can show you the first journal right here. This is, you can see it was first winter 1969.
And that's a long time ago.
Yeah,
I wasn't even born. Even my dad wasn't born, so.
Well, it's that's one of the things I'm really thinking about today is how we continue that spirit and bring it to new generations and give space for new generations to change Spectrum to meet the ever-changing times that we live in.
Right. I want only to send a message from other people that are really grateful for your work, because when you grow up in faith, you find out some questions and truth about many things. So you need something like this to have good foundation for your faith. So I really respect your work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the same thing for me. When I was in college, I was rethinking theology, loved the ideas, but also realized that there were a lot of things that we needed to rethink, and it just continues. And so we're always looking for new conversations, new questions we need to be asking. There's a lot of new territory. What I always hated was just saying the same thing over and over again.
Yes. Okay, so you wrote an article, Why I Believe in a Big Adventism. So can you tell us something about that? Because I like the idea that Adventism is much larger even than Miller and Ellen White and investigative judgment and other things. So can you please expand this more?
Sure. Well, I really appreciate you reading that and engaging with it. You're a writer, and it's just nice to know that there's people who are ready to work through, who are paying attention. So it's really an honor to do this, and I'm really open to your questions on this. There's a couple of perspectives on Adventism that I'm arguing against in this first, when I'm talking about big Adventism. One is the idea that the core of Adventism is the local church. Some people say, who cares about the general conference? Who cares about the fights over theology? And they can be progressive people, they can be very conservative people, but they basically think all that really matters is the 100 people that go to church and that. And that is a sacred, special experience, fellowship, fights, the life of the congregation is real. So I don't mean to minimize it. But I think Adventism is more than that. There are denominations like the Church of the Brethren that have only 200,000 people in the world that are part of it. We're much bigger than that with over 20 million people. So what I'm trying to do is take seriously the fact that we are a global denomination. And I was involved, you're probably familiar with the Episcopal or Anglican Church that comes out of course, England. I was involved with them, and they would have conversations about diversity, but the people doing it weren't that diverse because that church was very rooted in kind of British and America at the time. Of course, there's lots of Anglicans around the world, about 70 million. But what I remember one of my professors at Andrews saying is that you look around the Andrews campus, and it's objectively one of the most diverse campuses in the United States of America. And that's because Adventism is a special thing. And I don't mean like, remnant special, or let's say prophetically special, like some sort of metaphysical meaning. I mean, a group of people created something that 23 million people want to belong to in most of the countries in the world. That's very, very interesting. Now, there's others. Mormons have, an outside the U.S. presence, but it's not as big as the Adventist Church, and we started at the same time. So, I'm kind of proud of that. I'm kind of proud that Adventism has been able to adapt, that there's flexibility there. And I think part of it is because of our institutions. So the last part I'll say here as we get into this is the big Adventism is not just the numbers, but it's also institutions. So if Adventism was a country, we would be in the top third of the countries in terms of population. There's more Adventists in the world than there are Dutch people, okay? Now, we care about the Dutch. We should care about Adventism in a geopolitical sense and not just a religious sense. And then I looked at the amount of money in Adventism, which, you could say the Lord has blessed us with. And I did some estimates because of the healthcare, education, and the church itself, the billions of dollars of tithe and offering. And every year, $40 billion flows through Adventist control in revenue. So you think of like a corporation. If you looked at the New York Stock Exchange, Adventism would be in the large cap, almost, there's one more that's higher, but it would be in the large capitalization category, somewhere between the Honda Motor Company and Delta Airlines. Those are both brands that many people are familiar with. And so my question is, we're big. Let's be serious about that. And a question is, why aren't we better well known as a brand? We do good things. Why isn't that bigness, that brand, as big as our presence?
Yes, I like that transparency. I think UN give us some acknowledgement because we share our information about money and everything. So that's a good thing. I like that. So what are other impacts of Adventism about our schools and sanatoriums and others?
Yeah, to me, one reason I will always be an Adventist is not because of the 28 fundamental beliefs. I care about those. I like some more than others. I think most people, resonate with some more than others as well. The reason I'll always be an Adventist is, in part, it's just personal to me. I just want to do it. Just, kind of like a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. It kind of is what I've decided to do, and so I'm going to do it. And it'll create meaning in an existential way. But also, I think that there's potential there to express the values that I have that are deeper to me than just the 2300 day prophecy or even the Sabbath. They're connected, but that is my humanitarian values. I care about peace. I care about social justice. I care about trying to create conversations that minimize our differences and bring us together. It's just fun to, make new friends. Like you and I, we have a connection just because we're Adventist. And it's kind of cool, you're in a different part of the world, and yet we can have we could like hang out and have a good time. So there's a potential there with our institutions as well. Those educational institutions are doing good work, but the fact that we have the largest Protestant education system in the world, I think we could do better with it. Imagine if it was just perfectly designed to help people be the voices in their country that would oppose autocrats. Like if every Adventist, every Adventist knows you go to church on Sabbath. What if every Adventist knows you don't vote for somebody who wants to take away not just religious freedom, but other freedoms as well? What happens if you just knew that Adventists really were very honest people and you could trust them as leaders in your country even, and they could be leaders that people look up to politically, religiously. So I feel like there's a potential there that we've missed with our education system. And then our healthcare system is strong in the US. And one of the things that I'm trying to do with Spectrum is really draw attention to that leadership. Some of the biggest healthcare providers in the US are run by Seventh-day Adventists in not just a mission-driven way, really caring about meaning and purpose and spirituality, but also pretty good business. Like they not only pay their employees well, but they also think about climate change and making sure the hospitals, the clinics are sustainable and not contributing to climate change. So I'd love to see that happen more.
Yes, great point. I appreciate that. But let's get back to your point. You said that you don't need necessarily to agree with all fundamental beliefs, but fundamentalists would be intrigued with that. So can you explain how you have that approach flexible?
Yeah, um, so I grew up with that kind of understanding. So I understand where the fundamentalists are coming from. It's not a shock to me so it's not, I don't need to be educated about why beliefs matter. I do think that they matter, but I think that we have overemphasized beliefs. And an Adventist scholar, Rick Rice, wrote a book called Believing, Behaving, Belonging. We actually have some copies here in the office. And that just helps round out in any kind of system, like thinking about in any government, when, the nation is also a modern invention, relatively, 600 years old, and very much a European creation. But the idea is that you have some beliefs when you're part of a country. And also the weird things of you do something with colors on a piece of cloth, a flag, those kind of things can be very meaningful to people, but we have to recognize that they're just part of what it means to be part of a country. So when we're talking about Adventism, I think beliefs are just part of what it means to be Adventist. After all, there's ethics, and our beliefs don't actually, have a lot to do with modern ethical questions about how we create gender equality. And that's an issue that Adventists have really struggled with, the issue of women's ordination. And I think our beliefs have not really helped us there at all. They haven't, we fought. A good system doesn't fight over something for 40 years. There's something unhealthy about the way that we think about human behavior. And that includes, as we have to recognize increasingly around the world, we have to understand how we both deal with the fact that we have gay kids who grow up Adventist to very conservative parents sometimes. And how do those parents understand how to love their child and yet remain Adventist? So that's another area where our beliefs don't do enough. The 2300 days doesn't necessarily help people become a better parent or a better son or daughter. So those are some of the issues that I think are missing. And then the other part is belonging, which is also, I think, that's missing. We really have struggled. I think Europe has a lot to teach us about that because of secularization. The old reasons to belong to, think about the history of Christianity there, those have changed as the scientific revolutions and the philosophical revolutions have changed the way that people consider themselves human even. And so Adventism, to me, is meaningful beyond those, this just thinking about beliefs.
Yes, thank you. And Des Ford said that fundamentalism is from 1920s, and that's part of a bigger problem, not only in our church, but outside also. So what do you think about that and also his controversy, and can you expand that?
Yeah, there's two good scholars I'll recommend who are doing interesting historical work about the rise of fundamentalism and how it distorted Adventism. And that is Michael Campbell, who's now, he's a professor. He was a student of George Knight, and now he is at the director of Archive Statistics and Research at the North American Division. And then also Gilbert Valentine, who's now a research professor at La Sierra University. Both of them are not afraid to use the word fundamentalism and have really done a good job showing the history. And it's good stories as well. You can really see, even if you're familiar with the weird online world of Adventism that we inhabit, you can see on a website like Fulcrum 7 the exact same style that two guys back in the 1920s were using to kind of attack very conservative leaders when they just didn't get one thing perfectly conservative enough. And so from even farther, that kind of fundamentalist chaos, you see that always rising up in Adventism. And to get to your question about Des Ford, it's fascinating to see that he was part of a reaction. Actually, he was fighting against a fundamentalist, Robert Brimsmead, who had this kind of perfectionistic critique of Adventism. And Des Ford became quite prominent because he was such a eloquent foil for that fundamentalism. And I think, there's lots of people who experienced what happened in the late 70s and early 80s. I think his story to me is a really important cautionary tale that when church leaders react out of a sense of they're fearful and they're afraid of losing control, they actually damage the church And ultimately, I think what happened with Des Ford is really is a very important lesson that church leaders need to be aware of and realize who's actually on their side and who's not. Because Des Ford was trying to do a pretty nuanced critique of Daniel 8:14, which he was an expert in, and also helping us kind of work on our understanding of Ellen White. And when the church leaders kind of got pushed into applying pressure on him, it became personal. And like I said before, it became a reaction of fear, because they mistook who their real enemy was, and it wasn't Des Ford. It was actually the fundamentalists that keep rising up. We see that today, right now. They're just church leaders too often mistake those kind of middle people, often scholars, who are trying to open up a little bit of air so that we resolve some tensions in our theological and historical understanding. And those often become the enemy, when in fact, the enemy is really the rigidity of fundamentalism and the purity culture of fundamentalism, where no one can ever be good enough. Ted Wilson has done everything right for a fundamentalist, except he did the vaccine mandate, thing, and that good on women's ordination, good on no fun with music, clamp down on young student efforts
Maybe I'll
to
invite 1 hour so about
yeah
health
yeah
reform.
yeah. So anyway, the point there is just it keeps happening. So hopefully we can learn from it.
Yes, thank you so much. And what would you say to those people who left church maybe because they kind of hate those doctrines, 1844, Ellen White, and they are intrigued? So have you any message to them?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people leave, like you just mentioned. And what I always, what I want to let folks know that if they're interested in ideas, I think Adventism, since if you grow up in it or you at one point converted to it, you're familiar with the kind of core of it. I think it's a fun place to explore ideas about our world. And so, wherever a person is on their journey, I respect it. But we're always welcome. We have lots of folks who used to be Adventists who are still part of the Spectrum community, because they like to kind of see what's going on with the church, and they still like to, debate issues in Revelation, or they like to use Adventism. I think Adventism is also, it's a very recent religion. In scholarship, it's part of the what's called New Religious Movements study. So it's a legitimate thing that scholars study. And I think, I want, I like big Adventism, and I like lots of people part of this. So I think in my message representing Spectrum is, we would, send me articles, send me your thoughts. This is a place where you can, I hope, authentically be yourself. You don't have to say you believe something you don't believe to be part of Spectrum. We want you to come with all your questions and help us understand the Adventism better, I think, and critique helps Adventism get better.
Great, thank you so much. Now, can we talk about General Conference because this year will be something special, and what should we expect from it?
Well, it's a pageant. It's I've gone to, this will be 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be my 5th general conference to attend and report on. And it's most fun when it's happening during World Cup. Because in a way it's similar. You bring a bunch of people together from around the world, and there's something beautiful about the cross currents that happen. That's a helpful metaphor for what the general conference is. Just it is, you realize how global Adventism is. This year we will not have a big debate like we did with women's ordination. At least we knew that was coming. We got ready for it. It was a big event. The thing that everyone wants to know is, will Ted Wilson continue to be the president? Which he is, if he is definitely wanting to. There's no indication that he is going to resign before that. So his name will be brought up in the nominating committee, which will happen on that first Friday. What's disturbing is the way that we make this decision. Many corporations spend months figuring out who's going to be the CEO. We do it in an afternoon. And it's in a back room, and no one is allowed to know what people said. And there's no review of the resumes. There's no, head hunting. There's so that process, I think, needs to be reformed. But, it'll happen however it happens. Now, you never know what will happen. Maybe some other names will be brought up, discussed, and voted on, and maybe something incredible will happen. It's happened before, where even Ted Wilson's father thought he would be reelected in 1990, and people said, well, we've had enough of you, Elder Wilson, we'll go with someone else. So that could happen in this case. If not, Ted Wilson will become the second longest serving General Conference president of all time, after A.G. Daniels, who really reshaped Adventism, creating the union layer that restructured the power as well. So we will have to have some serious conversations about what's wrong with how we think about power in Adventism, because many governments don't let their heads of state last for 15 years plus, unless there's some issues, some issues in how I think we need to think about just the basics of like representation, because we're moving back in time to like kingly power kind of things, when it's just one guy over and over again, and he gets like 92% of the vote. That happens in countries that don't win democracy accolades. So there's something wrong there. The other interesting thing I want to really briefly point attention to is that thing I mentioned before. Because of the global experience of the COVID-19 pandemic and the issues that came up in some parts of the world around vaccines and mandates, that has really blown up in American Adventism and Australian Adventism. And it will be interesting because it's a fundamentalist critique of Ted Wilson and the General Conference and the power structure in general. So I want to pay attention to that. It happened in 2022 a little bit. The most interruptions and chaos was caused by this kind of anti-vax mandate crowd. And they're even more powerful now. Everything that's happening around the Michigan Conference, the Village Church, Ron Kelly, Conrad Vine, those sort of folks are teaming up with other entities, and I'm really curious to see how they will influence the delegates who come to the General Conference session, and if the conversations around mandates will turn into a deeper conversation about authority and church structure. So who knows?
Oh, thank you. Many informations, but some predict that fundamentalists will not lose their influence until 2030. So, what do you think?
Yeah, hope springs eternal, and I think fundamentalism is kind of baked into the way in Western Europe, Australia, the US, and in some parts of, South America, Caribbean, Africa. But I think it's a little different. I think the fundamentalism that we have is kind of mixed in with a kind of a false science that if you get all the texts right, if you get your beliefs right, then God will pour out his blessings and everything will be good in the church. It's kind of a magical thinking. And I think what happens is we kind of select for that type of person to join the church. The way that we do a Daniel and Revelation seminar is you kind of stack all these things together, and you want, like, Adventism sells itself as we're logical. And that, we love logic, but there's a kind of false logic in fundamentalism. And so I do think that it will be around for a while. I do think that it might change over time because of the growing demographic changes. And that kind of Western style of religion certainly exists in other parts of Adventism around the world. But I'm kind of curious to see how it will change. One thing that we're not really comfortable with in the US is like thinking that I'm an Adventist and I'm also another type of Christian. We're like pure Adventism. But in, parts of Africa, people are very comfortable with thinking I'm an Adventist, but I love Jesus so much, I'm also going to go to church on Sunday because I really like the music at this Pentecostal church or this evangelical church. And so that syncretism might change. It might kind of break apart the fundamentalist structure. Not saying that people don't really believe the beliefs, but I'm just not sure that we'll be stuck with the exact same thing just because of the pressures of change, and migration will change that as well.
Yes. What about women ordination? Will General Conference officially accept it finally?
Ted Wilson won't. So if he's reelected, we're stuck with the same horrible, obviously discriminatory policy, which just continues to damage our ability to attract the next generation because it's just objectively wrong, and we've fought about it in so long it's discrediting to us as intellectually spirit-led people. So if we can't resolve this soon, I do think that I will be tired of church leaders who say we need to get more young people involved, but you can't talk about women's ordination or we won't deal. We can't solve this. That's just, you can't do that. You got to make you want your children in the church, fix this issue. So yeah, I think I'm seeing some attitudes changing around the world on this. So I am hopeful. We put a really great piece out there by my predecessor, Bonnie Dwyer, who led Spectrum for over 20 years, reflecting on the fights led by many women. And she ends it by saying that she's not optimistic, but she is hopeful. And I really appreciate that perspective.
What about 6,000 years history of Earth? Well, General Conference removed that from official belief statements.
Well, you know what? It didn't used to be there. They stuck it in. Ted Wilson stuck it in. That was a 2010 move. It used to be quite, the history of writing that belief is really interesting because a couple of the people who contributed to that were, you know, were part of the Spectrum world actually, and they were quite literal when that belief was written. They weren't fundamentalistic though. And so they wanted to use the language of scripture. So if you look at the original belief, it has that kind of poetic language of scripture that helps us understand the main idea, which is there's a God that 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 brought this world into being, which gives us meaning versus meaninglessness. But the kind of literal 6-day short time chronology, day night stuff is really there to almost choke the life out of that belief and force people into something that, if you pay attention to science, it's very, very difficult to believe. So I don't know why they're making it harder to be an Adventist, but I would love to free that belief up like it used to be and create space for folks to think about the big ideas of what being, you know, what it means to exist, what those ideas are, rather than the mechanics of you know, the speculative mechanics of how it came into being.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, how big control is of Ted Wilson? How can you have any hope? Because many people are worried about that. So, can you say something?
Yeah, we're lucky that the Adventist organization has unions and divisions, even though the division president is also a vice president at the GC. Yeah, we made a bet, and I think it's because people were very scared about the future, and so they basically brought in a leader, and this happens in, you know, governments all the time. You bring in someone who will stop change because you're not sure if we change, if we'll be able to remain the same. Well, of course not, but people change all the time, and you know, you kind of negotiate out what that means. But yeah, he was brought in, you know, kind of like the plug in a bathtub to like stop any more water getting out. And over time, we're just living with the same dirty water. We haven't changed the water in our community. And Ted Wilson, I have heard him say this. I have written about it, and no one has said it's not true, including all the scholars that were there. I was there at a meeting of both the Adventist Theological Society and the Adventist Society for Religious Studies. And a question was put to Elder Wilson: what does he like to read? And he said, the Bible, Ellen White, and sometimes you know, news when he can, you know, but he's very busy, so sometimes the news. And then the heads of both of those scholar societies said, well, what about, you know, what, like, he's in a room full of people that, a bunch of people from ATS that actually are quite aligned with him theologically. He doesn't read their books. He doesn't read the books of, like, the other scholars who are lifelong Adventists contributing to helping us think through some of these difficult issues. He doesn't read things that he disagrees with. He doesn't read anything not inspired by God in his mind or the news. So that is a very, very special. There are general conference leaders, division leaders who are very conservative, who read widely, who think out, who are willing, who aren't afraid of that. But Ted Wilson is very different than what we've had for a long time. Somebody who just will not engage in any kind of the basic thing that we have as humans, which is to like encounter something with a slightly questioning mind, saying, I wonder if this might help me out, even though I don't already know it. He already knows everything that he needs to know in his mind.
Well, I'm sick. Yeah, so
Sorry,
have you
not
ever?
bringing any. I'm bringing bad news here.
Yeah, I like it, so no worries. I like honest answers, so yeah. Have you any advice for people that are uh, going to fundamentalist schools and churches that feel alone?
Yes, I was one of those. I was one of those. I had a mix of Adventist experiences, and for a while I was at a self-supporting academy, very conservative. We read Ellen White. We weren't allowed to read fiction. My dean, my boy's dean, I was getting Newsweek magazine, just reading about the world as a 17-year-old, and he would go through it with a marker and mark ideas or words he didn't want me to read and glue together pages of ads so I wouldn't, see things that I wasn't supposed to see. So I know that
Oh my God.
world. But I really feel this in my heart because I remember being that young Adventist and wanting, like, I would read a little bit of Plato, and my mind was open to that. I read a very conservative book that just was like on comparative worldviews. Here's how Christians see the world. Here's how Muslims see the world. Hindus. Here's how postmoderns see the world. And I remember seeing that and thinking, oh my goodness, like truth, to me, is it really objective or is there some subjectivity in how we think about reality? So, anyone who has come through that, I feel your pain, but it's a beautiful experience. It's painful because you have to almost break away some things in your mind, and certainly sometimes it's difficult when family relationships, maybe people are worried you're going down a dangerous road and you'll, end up, you know, you know, listening to, punk rock music and, becoming a a sort of bad Adventist. But in fact, I think that if you're willing to engage it and if you want to contribute to Adventism, Spectrum is a place that welcomes that. We want people who are willing to kind of break away from the past, some parts of the past, and create something new.
Yes, I would agree. So, great. And is there a danger on the other side, liberalism, so people can have lack of faith or spirituality, they become secular or something like that. So, can you say about that?
Yeah, that's why I argue for big Adventism versus liberal Adventism or no Adventism. Obviously, I have liberal values, progressive values. I care about the long tradition of liberty in philosophy, where it used to be a non-biblical idea to have a non-monarchical form of government. The Bible teaches kings are, they're not the best thing, but it's okay. Um, the best thing really is like a theocracy in the Bible. Well, we do not want theocracies in our world. It just doesn't work. So I think that there is something that's valuable about the kind of tradition of freedom. But I do think that the danger is that it's the liberal critique, when it's destructive, is destructive because it doesn't reconstruct, it doesn't build something, it doesn't contribute to a structure for us where we can get beyond just constantly asking questions and actually accomplish something in our world. So I think an example is humanitarianism. It's not just okay, there's something wrong in the world. It's engaged in actually trying to make it better. Is it perfect? No. Does it solve all the issues to go to a horrible war zone and try to feed a few thousand people? That doesn't solve the problems in our world completely, but it's doing something. And so I think if liberalism can't just be critical, we also have to be engaged and take a stand and do it, and not have to be 100% sure that it's correct or the best form of action. And so that's kind of what we try to do with Spectrum as well, is be constructive in our kind of ethical framework.
Right, Mr. Carpenter. Now, can you, for the end, for conclusion, say something about what should we embrace as members, and what is our core identity, according to your opinion?
Yeah, I think let me say it like this. I think Adventism has there's a really interesting trust in Adventism that I can't explain. I'm not sure where it's from. Maybe someone out there can pursue that kind of virtue, like hope as a virtue, that trust. Maybe it's because of the idea that we have these kind of core things in our name, seventh day. So, Adventists are familiar with the Sabbath. You can be very progressive, very fundamentalistic, but we know that Sabbath has some sort of interesting history, value, meaning, and it involves some kind of gathering, which I think builds trust, which I think we need in this world. And then the other thing is the Advent part, that there's a sense that whether you believe in an imminent Jesus coming back right away, get your life together kind of thing, or if you're just aware that there is a kind of an end to this world, that means that we need to think about our own place in this world, that it's not some sort of just magical, eternal thing that we're going through as humans. And I'm talking kind of abstractly here. That teleology, that's part of what it means to be an Adventist, and that kind of apocalyptic, which means that we are not happy with how things are. Politically, socially, spiritually, we want something better. That, I think, is something that's at our core. It's part of that defines us. And I feel like I can talk to any Adventist about those two things and have some fun disagreements, learn something from everyone on that in some way, and also find like real common ground that we can go have a meal together and feel like, hey, my life is better because we're part of a community that is about choice. You don't have to be an Adventist. You can just choose to do it, or you can choose to leave it. And the people who choose to engage anywhere there, at the core, on the border, outside the border, as long as we're having a conversation about defining Adventism, it's going to be a fun one.
Mr. Alexander, thank you so much for your time to share your thoughts and expertise. To our viewers, if you enjoyed this discussion, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Stay tuned for more deep dives into theology, history, and current issues. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.